Fabrice, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since being made aware of your work and really loving some of the concepts and also the path that you've walked in life, I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
Yeah, me too, Mark. And I'm glad, we're finally speaking. It took a while to synchronize the diaries, but it's happening now, man.
Wonderful. So, as you're aware, Fabrice, I start these off with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Yes, not an easy answer to that. I'll give you a few. There's obviously a lot of questions that I'm exploring, but perhaps those that could be more applicable to everyone. There's obviously, the what am I going to eat for breakfast tomorrow morning, which is a really important question, but I don't think anyone is interested in that answer. Um, One that has taken more importance than I thought it would is the topic of moving through the eras of life, the periods of life. And I was very sure of what I would encounter in my older years when I was younger. And I realized it was complete BS. And I'm going through a phase now. So I've just turned 60. And there's obviously nothing magical about the number. It's an arbitrary date. But there's in society, in culture, there's a significance which comes with the prospect of retiring. And what does that mean today? The concept of physiologically aging, even though we say 60 is the new 40, and the apps that I'm carrying with me tell me that's true, but again, there's something there. So this, how do we make the most of the, say, the last third of life, or maybe to make it a bit more applicable to more people, how do we make the most of the second half? If we visualize, and that's not true for everyone, but it's true for a lot of people I work with in my professional capacity, there's a first phase where we establish ourselves, we prove ourselves to the world. We confront ourselves to the world, and we push against, we find our limits, and at some point the limits push back, and we say, okay, well, I will never be an astronaut. I will never write as well as Victor Hugo or James Joyce. And okay, and then we learn to deal with our limits, but we're pursuing a track of success. And then at some point, and that tipping point happens at various points in life, but we've sort of established success, we've established validity as a human being, and now we're saying, well, what's going to be left when I'm reduced to a little pile of ashes? What will be left of me? What is the significance of my life? And this from success to significance is not, I didn't invent it. I think it was coined by Mark Buford. But I think it's very true. How do we find that our lives create meaning at some point where we're no longer chasing the next car, the bigger house, the the younger partner, the more, the good looking kids, etc. So that's one that I'm dealing with, because the prospect of slowing down is real, and it's not real because anyone wants to kick me out. It's real because I want more time for myself.
Right.
My bucket list is increasing. And so maybe for by way of background, and I don't know if that would be useful, but I'm a partner at McKinsey. Now, this is not a holiday, right? It's a demanding organization that puts a lot of premium on excellence, and therefore we all work extremely hard. I look after the leadership practice in Asia, so I'm on a plane almost every week, etc. Okay, so the opportunity cost of doing this one more year, 2 more years, even if my partners tell me, Fabrice, you're the greatest thing that was ever invented since sliced bread and we cannot live without you. There's stuff that I want to do with my life. It didn't matter when I was 50 or when I was 40. I didn't, because my life in front of me was infinite. But it's no longer infinite. I have a pretty good sense of my own mortality. And so, do I stay one more year in a job that I love, but that consumes close to not every waking hour, that would be an exaggeration, but a lot of my time and a lot of my mind as well, and a lot of my heart, because I really care. But I want to walk the Camino. I want to um, create retreats for individuals to bring them on their inner journey. And this I cannot do while I'm in a full-time demanding role. So that's a question, right? And at the same time, how to continue living a life that is fully engaged. So if I retire, when I retire from McKinsey, with its endless stimulation, colleagues, intellectual challenges, and the rest, how do I stay engaged? So I'm lucky that my practice, which is essentially coaching CEOs and their teams, taking leaders on a journey of discovery of themselves, this is applicable outside as well. So I can have a private practice and continue doing that. But there's a lot of other things that I need to consider. So that's one question. I know it's a bit of a lengthy answer. I apologize, but it helps me to think as I'm actually talking to you, Mark. Yeah, it helps me to formalize that. Uh,
But there's so many beautiful, well, the first thing anyway, like, how do I make the most of my life, or the second part of my life, or like the a third of life, whatever lens you're looking at this through. And then just the observation of becoming aware of one's mortality. Because I'm 41, and when sometimes when I hear people in their 70s talk about losing friends and thinking about mortality, even though I know and I contemplate death a lot, there's movements or there's milestones, as you're saying, regardless of how good you feel right now and how productive you are and everything else. It seems like and as much of a milestone as you say it is, like, that we put on things because now you're moving on to retirement, potentially in the lens of society. There's so much, it still seems like there's so much weight even to that contemplation, or even just being brought closer into focus.
yeah, and this comes in parallel with physiological change. Now,
Yeah.
the obvious ones we don't need to talk about here, but there's the brain structure changes, and this is not me making this up. This is well documented. Our short-term memory becomes much less, active, and so I don't necessarily remember what I had for dinner last night or where I put my car keys. But at the same time, I develop an ability to see patterns that my younger colleagues don't have.
Hmm.
And I can step out of the battlefield to see the battle from a perspective that younger colleagues, no matter how intelligent and and driven and experienced they are, they don't see these perspectives. And this is something that I've discussed with a lot of people in the same side of, say, 50. And we develop, let's call it wisdom, for lack of a better word, because I think it correlates pretty well with what I would consider wisdom. The ability to see patterns, the ability to see the big picture, a certain equanimity as well. Last month's results were really terrible. You see all the younger people say, "Oh my God, this is the end of the world. I'm gonna get fired. Let's launch a cost cutting program immediately. Let's call this a digital. Can Gen AI can help?" And they go into a frenzy. And the older guys in the room just smile and say, "Well, maybe next month will be better." And so what? I mean, look, you did everything you could. Now, if you screwed up and you're not working hard enough, I get it. But when you do everything right, don't beat yourself up, man. And and you see, the corporate world has this way of making you insecure because it measures the outcome over which you have almost no control, instead of looking at the income. I derive enormous satisfaction from the inputs,
Yeah.
not the outcomes. Right? I do my best. And I encourage my teams, my colleagues, my clients, do your absolute best. I had this conversation no later than this morning with the CEO. You know, now the question is, how do you know you're doing your absolute best? How do I know that every day I show up as my best self? Because that's the concept is nice, but how do you know that you couldn't do like 10% better, 5% better? But assuming that you have a way to track yourself and judge, evaluate yourself, because no one can do that for you, then the outcomes are the outcomes. And I think that's a shift that happens when you get wiser and you recognize that you have control over the inputs. But in a complex world, yeah, of course, if I a coffee machine, I have control over the inputs, but I also control the outputs. I know the machine is going to make me a coffee every time I press the button. It's not going to make me a ham sandwich. So on all the technical world, stuff are very much under control. But the world that we deal with, which is largely composed of human beings, organizations, cultures, markets, political influences, what do I control? And why would I beat myself up if the market suddenly has decided that my share price should be devalued because they don't like some exposure that I have to some country, etc. Even though my company is doing exactly the same thing it was doing last month and last quarter, and we're producing great results, I'm not going to beat myself up. So that's a shift that I kind of towards less towards, or I need to know, I need to control, and more towards I accept whatever arrives and I build wisdom. And instead of having all the answers, I have potentially more questions than answers, but I ask the right questions.
What was that? What's the evolution of that been like for you in terms of control or coming to that perspective? I know you're mentioning there's, as we go move through the eras of life, and obviously we look at different, we have different perspectives as we go through each one. But how have you found yourself in relationship with control as you're kind of exploring even this next phase, or thinking about what's coming for you as well?
Yeah. So as as a younger professional, I tried to control a lot of outcomes because, like it or not, you're evaluated by a bunch of people who decide whether you're competent or not, who decide how much bonus you get at the end of the year, who decide whether you get a promotion, and you try to control that. Now, this is extremely tiring. I was tired when I was 40 years old. I was tired. Now, I grew up in the McKinsey system, moving up the ranks, right, and being elected a partner, etc. When I was 36, I was tired. And then I think what happened to me is very personal, but the pattern is relevant for everyone. Is, at some point there's a shock, something that wakes you up, and it's never pleasant. But I think with hindsight, it's always good when it happens. For me, it was the realization that the career I had put so many hours into, years of my life, to become a bank CEO. It sounds silly. I mean, who would want to be a bank CEO, right? But I wanted to be a bank CEO. I thought it was pretty cool. Now, mind you, it was the 90s, and the 2000s, different era, pre-global financial crisis. So we still thought the banks were like the godsend. Um, I had a shot when I was 40. I left McKinsey to join one of my clients. I was sent by this client to run the large division of a bank that they owned, complex bank, 500 branches, the decent sized business for someone who's fresh out of consulting. And the next step was CEO, and it was not very far away. It was a few years away if I just did what I had to do. And I hated it. I hated every minute of my life.
Wow.
And I hated it because it was just not me. There was nothing wrong. The bank is still in existence. It's doing well. Generations of leaders have gone after me, and they've done well. So it's not anything to do with them. It was my realization that, man, I just don't like this. I'm not getting any fulfillment from this. I'm not getting any meaning. I like this meaning thing. And the acid test for me of the complete utter absence of meaning was if a giant spaceship arrives from another galaxy, hovers around the country, and sucks my bank out of existence and goes back into the galaxy, and my bank has disappeared, who would miss it? And the answer was no one. I mean, we made the same credit cards, we gave the same mortgages, we had the same current accounts, we had the same transfers, the same SME loans, the same, I'm going through the whole gamut of banking products here. It's not very sexy, but we were doing the same thing as in those days. Now it's consolidated a bit, but in those days, probably another 100 banks in that country. And I felt utterly depressed by that. I said, like, this is so depressing. Maybe it's linked to a bit of arrogance of, I should be doing something special. But I had when I was at McKinsey, and so I returned to McKinsey 20 years later. But when I was at McKinsey, there's a sense that, you're doing something special. It's a very well-known company that is reputed for its excellence, and, the counselors in the shadow, for the CEO. So there's something unique. It's often been compared to, the Jesuits, or some mysterious order like that. And I like that. And then I plunged into the banking world, and I was one of 100. And I thought, well, I lost my sense of meaning. And that is not a pleasant awakening, I can tell you that. It's fun for me to tell the story now,
Of
20
course. Yeah.
years later. Oh, I did A, B, C, D, and if everybody who listens does A, B, C, D, you will be fine, guys. You will find your meaning in life. Oh, bullshit. I was completely lost, stuck, afraid to leave because I was making good money. So the cost of living is huge. No idea what I could do. No one to talk to. Well, so I could fast forward the story and tell you, yeah, I finally found something that matched exactly what I loved. But that process of awakening, it mirrors quite well the William Bridges transition. Like there's an ending, and the ending was extremely unpleasant, and then the limbo in the middle was also very, very unpleasant. And the new beginning is kind of promising, but at the beginning you don't know that the new beginning is good.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking of my own experience of having. I've mentioned it on this before, but I left the job on the first day with a 40% pay increase, and had I known what the last number of years would have looked like immediately at the time, before more clarity arrived, I probably wouldn't have made the choice. Um, so it's a fascinating thing to navigate from your point of view. Just this sense of awakening, though, that accompanied it. Could you give me a sense? Even you're saying that there is very little enjoyment, even a sense of being somewhat lost. Like, how did you, and nobody to talk to, how did you start to kind of make sense, or even come more, I guess, to terms with the significance of meaning for you then, even with this? And I think it's a wonderful experiment for anyone to run in their lives. Like, if an alien spaceship came along and sucked up whatever it is, in whatever aspect of your life, what difference would it make, or what would be the consequences of that? But from your perspective, how did you begin to kind of navigate your way through that those moments?
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, this question about the alien spaceship pulling your company out of the earth, I ask every client I work with.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how many don't have a very convincing answer. So, but back to my thing. So, look, it's always a question of luck, right? So things happen to you by luck, but I find that some people tend to be more lucky than others. And I, so the realization was basically when I took stock. I've been a consultant all my life. I have 2 years of banking experience. I don't like it. This is not me. What else can I do? And I think no matter what people do, there will always come a moment where you say, what else can I do? This is not fulfilling me, and what else is there? And then you realize, oh my God, I don't have, I'd love to be an airline pilot, but it's too late. And I'd love to do this, but I need to go back to school for 6 years, and the opportunity cost is enormous. And so I think a lot of people go through these things. For me, I was approached by a friend who at the time was a partner in a global executive search firm. She called me. She said, "Hey, I have a great banking job for you. I know you're happy where you are." Of course, she didn't know. And she said, "But why don't you come and join this even better bank with this even better job?" And I said, "Karen, you must be kidding. I will not move to another banking job in a million years." And then she was like a little bit taken aback, like, all the headhunters when they call you with what they think is a great job. And God bless her, she said, "Well, okay, why don't you join us then?" And that little sentence, was luck. But then I immediately thought, well, what does that mean? What do you guys do really? I've been at the receiving end of the phone calls, but I've never made them. Would I like it? Would I not like it? And I decided to explore. Now, a few things happened. Number one, I really enjoyed everyone I met. And what I enjoyed was that they seemed to have done something similar to me, a first career where they were busy at the coal face, and then a second career where they were helping people with their careers because they had sort of scratched the itch of achieving success and they were looking for something else. So I thought, this is really cool. Like, wow, there is a second half of life where you can be fulfilled helping others instead of climbing the ladder yourself, right? And then I looked back at my own experience, etc. And when I was in consulting, I was always part of the recruiting trips. I loved recruiting junior consultants. I loved mentoring them, training them. I had a huge interest in the human experience. How do we grow as leaders? I had read plenty of books on psychology in my 20s. I had never done anything with it, but the interest, the seeds were there. And I thought, well, this might be actually a lot more interesting than I thought initially. The rest is history. I left my banking job, became a headhunter with that prestigious search firm, learned the ropes, did pretty well, left after 8 years, started my own firm doing the same thing, but in a different setting, did another 10 years. And that was a fantastic time of my life. Much more focused on helping clients find great executives and helping executives make sense of their careers. And I just loved it. So that's how the transition happened. But it took me, between the realization that, oh my God, what have I done? Like, why did I become a banker? And the beginning of the getting my head out of the water in my new executive search role, where I finally managed a little bit, how this works, how to be successful, who are the colleagues that I need to support and work with, who can help me figure things out. It's 2 years, minimally, maybe 3. So the process of reinvention, right? The caterpillar turns into a butterfly is a 3-year process minimally. And I've seen that time and again with the clients I coach. it's minimally 2 3 years, and with many people, the reinvention, not the change, right? Changing from Coca-Cola to Pepsi is a, you know, quick, but reinventing yourself, creating a new identity, a new professional identity, which inevitably will create a new personal identity. That is a long process, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if that you relate to that, Mark. I mean, you've gone through your own
Yeah,
changes and
it's
ones as
it's
well.
yeah, but I think what you're touching on there though is really important, and I think this is particularly pertinent when people even come to more of a kind of contemplative, or even if you wanted to call it spiritual inquiry, and even if some of that's just very much psychology and using working with a therapist and things like that, we're often very quick to say the old me, or it's a bit like how you described there, the change between Coke to Pepsi, that can happen like this. But this actual transformation, I find, is very interesting, because I think oftentimes, I remember I was in my I think I was maybe around 34, maybe 33, when I read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And I was just kind of flippantly using, oh, that's just my ego. That's just my ego. And, talking about the pain body as if these were actually my experiences, or these were actually my perspectives. I think you said something very interesting, even just at the start, about how when you're at this stage now of your life and you're seeing the bigger picture, or there's actual wisdom in what you're noticing, you're embodying it. You're not like, your experience of those quarterly, or those quarterly results or monthly results aren't the same reaction. And so I think it's really interesting that, like, when am I actually an embodiment of the words that I'm now saying? And that, to me, that definitely takes a process. Like, there's so many things, I think, even from the point of view of, we're so conditioned. And as you're talking about, going through your 20s and proving yourself, and same, I guess, for a lot of people in their 30s as well, and coming up against the limitations of that. You mentioned, even I'm maybe not going to write as well as James Joyce. So just an awareness of this expression, or this exploration of what we are. It's really interesting, I think. Like, when does, like, my heart, my mind, and my actions and my words, when are they aligned? And for me, with all the conditioning, and I don't mean that in a malevolent way, but just the societies we're used to growing up in, I think it's a really interesting thing. And for to answer your question, that definitely takes time for me. Like, and I think it's none of it, to go back to your point about control, none of it makes me impervious to the outcomes of life. But it is also interesting just how you might respond to an up or a down quarter. I think that's when we know that a change has actually occurred, which I find a fascinating process to go through.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true, and it that process can be difficult. And look, I think we all navigate many changes in life, right? So it's not to say there's at the midpoint somewhere around 30, between 35
Yeah,
and 50, something will happen to you. Something happens to you pretty much all the time. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big, but we all go through the adventure of life, with its good things and its bad things. And I think that there isn't a single person who can say, I've never had a drastic change in my life.
yeah,
Sometimes the change comes from within, which is the case I described. It was really an awakening that what I was doing was not fulfilling me. Sometimes the change comes from outside. You get fired, you get you lose someone you love, um, you go through a divorce. I've been through these things.
yeah,
I've gone through a divorce where, as a result of the hectic life as a consultant, and I take 100% of the blame for that. And I lost my mother when I was in my early career, etc. So I think everyone will relate to that. There isn't,
Yeah.
there's this Buddhist story where the Buddha tells a lady who's mourning the loss of a child to go and collect a mustard seed he tells her, go around the village and bring back a mustard seed from a household when nothing terrible has happened, where they haven't lost anyone, and that mustard seed will bring back your child. And of course, everywhere she goes, everybody has had loss
Yeah.
of parents, relatives, children, brother, sister, whatever. And she comes back empty handed, and she realizes that the quest is universal, that we've all gone through loss. So uh, it can come from outside. This morning, I had a coaching session with a CEO, a fairly large infrastructure company, and he lost his dad last week. And normally we talk about managing the board, all the good topics that the CEO counselor talks about with their clients, right? Like building relationships with the board and
Right.
navigating complexity. We spend an hour just in that moment of what he's going through. You know, what does that mean? What is the meaning of this now that he's the next in line? It's a very deep experience. And at the end, he said that he hadn't shared, that with anyone, and it was extremely important for him to have a safe place to have that conversation. And he's not lonely. He has a family, a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful family, and a sister, and his mother is still with him, and the rest. But having a space where you can process what's going on like that. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how successful you are. You will go through.
Which which kind of leads me even to just some a kind of question that was emergent for me, around the significance then for you of, you mentioned an awakening at this point. Um, when did that when did, all the different things you've done around, even if it's, yoga or meditation or work around retreats, just because when you mentioned that there, even that hour with the CEO, to just the space to reflect, obviously that's a hugely seminal moment, the loss of a parent, but even just as we've been discussing, there's so many experiences in life that unless we get a chance to process some of these things, they can really stay with us, or there can be a residue from it, or they can move us in ways that we're not even aware of at all. When did that exploration for you open up more? And when, you've busy career, reaching certain places, within institutions and so forth, but when did all this exploration become more significant for you?
I think it came in various stages. I cannot say, one morning I woke up and suddenly I decided to be a spiritual person. It came very gradually. But what's interesting is that the seeds were always there. So I'm not I grew up in Paris, so Catholic education, but nothing in depth. Uh, and I didn't practice after my communion. Uh, no one in my family was particularly interested, and so I completely ignored it for many, many, many years. But somehow there was an interest in let's call it the spiritual with a capital S. And I remember driving around France, passing by a monastery, and being attracted to the monastery, and say, what is the life of the people in there? That they must have discovered something that I haven't discovered yet. And and then of course I continue driving, and nothing happens because I'm focusing on what a 20-year-old focuses on, right? uh, Much more interested in chasing girls than in becoming a monk. Um, but it was there. I remember reading on Indian spirituality, all that in my 20s, right? And again, doing nothing with it, but the seeds were there. Just like the curiosity about psychology and the human development journey. Um, I think things started falling in place when I moved to Asia. That's a long time ago now. And I was immersed in that Eastern culture. I mean, there's many Eastern cultures, but there was something, so it became easier to explore, Buddhism in particular. Uh, I started studying yoga as well, practicing meditation. So that's my late 30s. Obviously, that supported me in some modest way during my professional transition. But that's really when I thought, okay, there's something there that I definitely, particularly the path of yoga and the path of Buddhism, really resonated well. It's like, my God, that makes a lot of sense, and I need to spend more time, in Buddhist monasteries, in ashrams, and the rest. Um, that was a hobby until my professional practice of recruiting executives started morphing into less on the transaction of let's close a deal, let's recruit someone for this client and close the deal and get my fee. But I'm actually very interested in supporting this executive. They may get the job, they may not get the job, they may want the job, they may not want the job, but there's an interest in what their trajectory is, what their journey is, and the interrogations that they have, and what makes them successful or what makes them fail, that I found fascinating. And I started spending a lot more time coaching people than recruiting them, to a point where the recruitment became a distraction, and a synchronicity, as always. McKinsey called my friends at McKinsey, said, "Hey, Fabrice, do you want to come back? We have this leadership practice in Asia. We need a leader. And would you be interested in coming back? It seems like in the last 20 years, you've been doing stuff that we want and we need for our clients." And I said, "Of course, I'll come back. I love it." So then I started integrating spirituality in my work. There's no I don't think there's any support, meaningful support, that we can give to an executive. I'm saying an executive because that's my client, but
Yeah, yeah.
anyone in life, really, without considering questions of uh, purpose, questions of what gives you meaning, question of what gives you fulfillment, a connection to something bigger than us. Like, life is horrible. If you think you're alone in the universe and you're just the product of chemical reactions, it's a very, very sad life, I find. And I can say that because I was like that for the first 40 years of my life. But I realized that this leaves us in pretty close to, chasing money for the sake of money, chasing pleasure for the sake of pleasure, honors, power, status, wealth, but it's never enough. And therefore we get no satisfaction, like Mike Jagger would say, because we
Yeah.
get habituated. So, you think when you get $1 million, you're going to be happy, but the day you get $1 million, you want two. It's like cocaine. It's never enough. You need more and more. And that cycle of samsara, as the Buddhists would call it, is a never-ending cycle until you break it and you realize that you need to connect yourself to something bigger than you that keeps you anchored. Otherwise, you're like drifting. No matter how successful, you could be a billionaire, but you're drifting. You're completely unmoored. So I think these questions are center to supporting someone in their development. And the rest, how to relate to your chairman, how to build a high performing team, how to make sense of a competitor's move, etc., is great. It's what keeps the business alive. So you need it. You need performance. But performance without purpose will lead to all the excesses and distortions and things that we're witnessing every day in the news.
That's the use of the word drifting there is I know you said unmoored as well, but the sense of drifting, I think that there's a lot of weight to that. I haven't really heard of it like that because, and I think it's probably so much it's probably so much more accurate than, we often think of people being bad actors, and these people are out to get these people, or whatever it will be. But I think a lot of the time when some certain actions begin, it is almost because there's this absence of being anchored by something or being held by something. And even as you've just alluded to there, like the idea that we're just some chemical occurrence, like it kind of deadens the experience of being a human or being alive, or you know even the sense of being part of something bigger. When you kind of use that terminology of drifting, what comes to mind for you in that? And I guess how did you anchor yourself, like, I know you're mentioning through yoga and study of different traditions, but did you what was the process like for yourself, even in or when did you even become aware that you were no longer drifting, I guess?
Well, I hope I'm not drifting. I don't know, right? Um, I I think the opposite of drifting is not necessarily being fixed, like
Yeah,
rigidly anchored to something. I think the opposite of drifting is being committed.
yeah,
And for me, the shift was to realize how much I had difficulties committing. And we see absence of commitment in many symptoms, people who jump from job to job, particularly a hallmark of younger generations, 1 year here, 1 year there, and now I want to be promoted senior vice president. But, joke aside, I've met hundreds of executives who basically couldn't hang on to a job, and it was always somebody else's fault. Commitment to a partner, commitment to a cause, commitment to a place. And we see also people, the new nomads, the digital nomads. Oh, I want to live, a year in Bali, and I want live a year in Costa Rica. Yeah, do you think that's going to make you happy? No, there's nothing wrong with living in Bali. I love it. But, the problems of life, the crap that happens on a daily basis of having to pay your invoice and people annoying you, that happens in Bali too. Yeah. So what are you running from? And of course you need experiences. I'm not saying you don't need experiences, particularly in the first half or the first two-thirds. It's lovely to visit the world. You gain a lot from that. I've done it a lot. I don't know how many countries I've visited and worked in, but you know, I've lost count. But this is not a recipe, this absence of commitment to a place. If you look in the world, the human history, you know, particularly with the development of agriculture, very few people are nomads. We tend to be anchored to the land. And I think there's something in the way we've evolved in the last 10,000 years that really gives us a sense of meaning, this being anchored to the land. And we've obviously, with planes and global careers and digital world, we've lost it. And I'm not saying maybe a 1% of people can be nomads and be happy with 1 year in Bali and 1 year in Phuket and 1 year in Tokyo, maybe. Uh, but when I ask my clients, who a lot of them have had international careers, and a lot of them are married to someone who is not from the same country. which raises a lot of questions. Where, in what language do you raise your kids? What kind of schooling system? Where are we going to live when we retire?
Yeah,
His
yeah.
country or her country? These are very, what is your place of belonging? So this commitment is, I find, commitment to a place, commitment to a partner, commitment to a profession or a purpose, like what is it that gives you a fulfillment? That's for me what gives a sense of peace and serenity, because you know who you are.
Yeah, this is really beautifully put, and I think there's before you said commitment, the word that was coming up for me was like a conviction in how one lives, and then even as you were speaking, really a commitment to one's life, like really, and as you also spoke, there's a memory just popped up in my head. I just left a career in finance. The year before, I was part of a team to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Good things that happened around other things that I was involved with. I, my wife and I had taken off to Peru. We had got a bungalow by a river, by a mountain near some Inca ruins in the Sacred Valley in Peru, in a beautiful phase with my wife as well. As that point, I had all the time now and space to explore these things that I was looking to explore. And it's not like it was just this blissful experience, as John Kabat-Zinn's book, "Wherever you go, there you are." That image, or that those words, accompany this image I have of this beautiful bungalow with all these mountains behind it. As you say, great experiences to accumulate in life and to reveal more of ourselves as we go through. But I definitely think we have a lot of forward projection as to what will make us happy or what will be an answer. And that forward projection doesn't usually involve having a felt experience of the moment or the present moment of the reality of it, because how could it? So I think and just the questions you're asking there are questions that are very pertinent for me. I have a German wife and I'm living in Berlin and I'm from Ireland, and they're really interesting questions. And almost going back to your opening idea around eras of life, it's very interesting how these different things become themes at different stages in our life to navigate. Very intrigued from your point of view, going back to that original question, and even in some of the context of what we've been discussing, how do I make the most of this second life or second half of life? What emerges for you, even beyond what you had shared at the start around that?
Well, one thought as I was listening to you, Mark, one thought, this quest for purpose.
Hmm.
Sometimes we have this misguided idea that there is a purpose out there, and all I need to do is I need to find it.
Yeah.
And to find it, I'm going to go to the mountain and the monastery at the top of the mountain, or the cabin in Peru, and I'm going to meditate until I find that purpose, right? I'm going to read tons of magazines. I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to, you know, that seems fairly unproductive to me. And
Yeah.
I say that because I've seen, well, first of all, because there's research, and I always, when in doubt, see if anyone has really worked on that issue. And it turns out that yes. Um, it's experiential. Finding what your purpose is in life cannot be an intellectual quest.
No.
It's an embodied quest. So, would I like to become a yoga teacher? Well, start teaching yoga. You don't need to quit your day job. Start teaching yoga. I'm using that example because I did it. For years, I've idealized the lifestyle of meditation and living with peace and harmony and teaching yoga, until I started teaching yoga and realized that it was the same crap as when I was in banking, except you're paid less. So I might as well stay where I am, right? So, but I look, the one of the best advice. There's a few people in my life that I'm really grateful for, and one was the dean of INSEAD, a fairly well-known business school, and I studied at INSEAD. I got an MBA there, and maybe 10 years into my post MBA career, I was like thinking, oh, maybe I should have uh, been an academic. I love, I'm a person of ideas, if you cannot tell that by now, right? I love ideas. I love communicating ideas. Uh, Maybe I should work on my PhD and become a professor. And Dean Gabriel, very calm, you know, had been around the block. He must have seen quite a few jokers like me in his life. And he said, Fabrice, come and teach at INSEAD. And they gave me a course. I went to INSEAD. I taught finance for a trimester, an elective course. Well, it just took that to realize I was not meant to be an academic. I'm so grateful for that experience.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful. You know, there are many, many things I liked about being teaching. But there was also, I realized it was not for me. The yoga teaching I experienced, and it was not for me. And I think there's so much value in discovering that something is not for you. It's almost as valuable as discovering that something is for you.
I absolutely agree, and I think it's something we should almost celebrate more than we do, rather than it becoming a full stop or a dead end or something like that. I think this is just an intrinsic part of the process.
Yeah. And I've seen people throwing away their careers, thinking, "Oh, I'm tired of the corporate world. I'm going to become an entrepreneur." Oh, if you're forced to, you're fired from your job and no one will give you a job, then you become an entrepreneur. Okay, I get it. But idealizing stuff like that just because you want a little bit more freedom. You think entrepreneurs have freedom? Well, good luck with that, man. And I've seen that, investment bankers who put all their savings into buying a yoga studio and teaching yoga. Uh, People from the UK or from Ireland thinking, oh, I'm going to move to Spain to retire because their son. Well, yeah, once you realize that they actually speak Spanish and you don't speak a word of Spanish, maybe, you think again. So I've seen so many, and it's not to say don't move to Spain. I'm saying while you're still, when you still have choices and options, etc., why don't you try these different things? And that process of embodiment, go and spend 1 month in Spain during your summer holiday and go back the following year and go back. And then you'll know. And there's plenty of people who've made a wonderful, successful transition, but they had experienced the change before. It's true for career. It's true for a lot of things in life. The one part where I'm not 100% sure it applies is with romantic partners,
Mm.
where I've living in Asia, I have many Indian friends, many of whom come from arranged marriages. They didn't have a chance to try it, and these are some of the happiest relationships I've seen. So on this one, I defer my judgment. But joke aside, for the a lot of the most important choices in your life, you cannot resolve them intellectually. And I always say, I call it the breadcrumbs. Look at the breadcrumbs in your life. What were the little seeds that some at one point gave you energy? For me, if I look back in my 20s, I was reading spirituality, I was reading psychology, I was reading Carl Lowen on the embodiment and the somatic work. I was a civil engineer for God's sake. I had no business reading these books. I was designing bridges and roads and buildings. Like, what the fuck do I do reading psychology? So obviously I do nothing with it. And then I become a consultant. And there's a bunch of colleagues at McKinsey. It was early 2000, and say, hey, we're setting up this performance leadership institute, and it's about transforming leaders. And I look at their material and I say, oh my God, this is what I want to do with my life.
Hmm.
And I did nothing with it. I went back to my banking clients, etc. But so then you look back and you say, well, all the seeds were there. I loved working on helping people with their careers, recruiting them, psychology, spirituality, and the rest. Why don't I, make something out of it? I don't know what will come out of it. No, it took me 30 years to finally connect these dots. But they were there all the time, and I suspect they're there all the time for a lot of people who listen to us.
Yeah, I just to echo your point though on purpose not being an intellectual exercise. Like I think this is one of the great misgivings or misunderstandings we have, that you could sit down with somebody and know without having any experience of doing something that this is for me. Like I've seen it too often as well. Just the thought of what something will be and the lived experience of it are often, they can often be very, very different things. I love where you're talking though about breadcrumbs, and even the image of you driving past a monastery and having a kind of a curiosity around that. Like I think this is where, regardless of what anyone tries, and I make some I've made some big slashes in terms of decisions, which I wouldn't be recommending to anyone. And ironically, same thing happened with my wife. After I'm with her for 9 years now, and kind of asked her to marry me after 5 weeks of being with her in India. So I do think there are some.
Oh yeah,
It's
here you
interesting
go.
the
Yeah,
experiences where it's not the conventional thing. It's something, but that's something embodied, I think, as well, which I think you're also pointing to as well. But I think it does speak again though to the significance of creating enough space in your life to even be able to notice what is a breadcrumb or not. Like, because that has there's a lot that will probably encourage you not to follow the breadcrumbs, or it may not seem like something significant enough. But if you pick up, if you observe, or you follow, or you engage with enough of them, there will be a bigger, as you were kind of opening at the start, you can see the patterns in life. Like if you continue to pay enough attention, then something that may seem of non-significance to somebody else could actually be really, really significant in the context of a life.
yeah, yeah. And not everything that shines is gold,
Yeah.
and sometimes the process of discernment is challenging. But it's more challenging when you don't make space and time for examination. Um, I find that if you create enough space in your life, and in particular, I always talk about silence and solitude. And it doesn't have to be 10 days where you eat grass like a rabbit, and even that twice a day and not 3 times a day. But no, so you don't need to do the full spiel retreat. Just spend an hour, go walk in go walk in nature, and process, not intellectually, because that very often doesn't help, but process emotionally, somatically, what is happening here. Yeah, a job, you get a job offer, you go for 2 3 interviews, pay is good, but there's something that doesn't, go and process. I went through a challenging experience, because at the same time McKinsey called me to come back. I had a very good offer from a very reputable firm, and but it was to do more recruitment, and I agonized over it for a month. which is a long time in the world of recruiting. You don't keep an offer on your desk for a month, right? It's not proper. You don't want to hold people back. And what led me to choose to return to McKinsey was actually two dreams. And I'm very attentive to my dreams. I think we process a lot of stuff in our dreams, and I have a dream journal. And two dreams where I dreamt that I had returned to McKinsey, and there was a welcoming feeling, and people, forming a circle around me, and me being happy to have returned to the firm. I'm not saying everybody will have dreams. I'm saying take everything you can, stop the Excel spreadsheet pluses and minuses. But by the time you get to a tough decision, I can tell you the Excel spreadsheet will be 50-50.
Yeah.
Because if the Excel spreadsheet was 70-30, you would have made the decision a long time ago. You wouldn't even have noticed that you made the decision. So by
Yeah.
the time you start, twisting your brain into what should I do? Should I marry her or not? The answer is no longer intellectual.
Fabrice, just looking at the time and some of the things that we've been exploring, like even just the sense of mortality, questions around the second half of life, significant moments in life, awakenings, um, a sense of also just an awareness of control, the lack of control we have on some things, focusing on the inputs, really the significance of an embodied life in terms of realizing what we feel in certain moments, or the experience of something is far more important than the intellectualizing of something or projection into the future about something. The sense of exploring these curiosities, trying things in life, the significance of finding some grounding in life or anchor connection to something bigger than ourselves, the significance even just now you're mentioning around silence and contemplation, and something beyond the pluses and minuses and the Excel spreadsheets of life. Really curious to hear your response to the question of what is a good life for you.
Yeah. So that's a tough one. I don't have a generic answer. I can just answer from my perspective. And for me, what I you know pray for in my meditation is to find peace. And I think anyone who has found peace, and it's not a question of what job you have and partner and where you live and how much money you have. Some of the things help, and we know they help, and we know that not being lonely is important. But the consequence is, are you at peace? And so for me, that's the ultimate guide, or test. Am I at peace with the life I have? Am I at peace with the outlook of my life? There's a number of things I'm looking forward to. Working on the doctorate program, for example, spending more time in retreat, walking the Camino, whatever, right? We talked about that. So am I at peace with that? Am I at peace with not doing it now, but doing it in a hypothetical future? Am I at peace with where I live? That was a difficult decision. My wife is Singaporean. Uh, what is my place of belonging? I've come to have an answer for that question, but it was not an easy one. So there's many topics on which I'm not at peace, and there's something that is not settled, that keeps dragging me down and using energy, right? And but for me, a good life is one where you're, I don't know if it's 80% of the time, but you feel at peace with the choices you've made. Uh, Everyone will have made mistakes. Uh, I don't think regrets are particularly helpful, but learning from the mistakes is particularly important. Yeah. Hopefully, we don't make the same mistakes twice. Uh, so I don't agonize over the past. I've made my share of mistakes. just trying to build something where there's fewer mistakes and to be at peace with it. So I don't know, maybe it's what the Buddhist would call that equanimity,
Hmm.
which is not the absence of emotion as is sometimes interpreted wrongly. We can have tons of emotions, including the the anger and the pride and the joy and the sadness, whatever. You live your emotions, but emotions are just that, right? They're just emotions. They're fleeting. They're impermanent, and so we can return. And that's for me the what I aspire for.
I think I love the sense of peace, coupled with a belonging. You mentioned earlier. I think that word drifting, I think, is a really interesting one that you mentioned, and the commitment to this, to whatever it is, whether it's place, and that's where a sense of belonging can come from as well. And I think there's so many kind of fundamentally important areas that you've been exploring around that are really significant parts of life for many of us through all the eras that people will be at different various stages. So I took so much from this conversation, and I'm really grateful to have had you here today, Fabrice, on the What Is a Good Life podcast. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome, Mark. I really, you, I think you got me thinking, and you helped me a lot through your questions. So thank you.